A really, really long time ago, a time before toys, a time before everything, God made the world a time long ago. And just like carpenters make stuff out of wood, God made the world and it was well good. He made all the plants, He made all the trees, He made animals, birds, and He made you and me. And that time long ago, that time that was good, God walked beside humans through the trees in the wood. But the humans He made, like you and like me, said mean things and were really quite nasty. They'd thump and they'd punch and they wouldn't make amends. And so God and humans could no longer be friends. But to be friends again, God had a plan. One day He would send a very special young man. So it happened one day, or maybe in the night. An angel came to Mary and gave her quite a fright. Don't be afraid! Get scared or jump! God's gonna give you a big belly bump. Your belly bump's a baby, and He will be the great one. Why not call Him Jesus? He really is God's son. Now, inside Mary a baby was growing, and Joseph stared at the baby bump showing. A bit worried about how the baby got there, Joseph scratched his head and twizzled his hair. But when Joseph was snoring in his dream he had a visit. An angel said Mary would give birth through the Spirit. There's a baby inside Mary, a tiny precious life. But don't be afraid, says the angel. Name him Jesus and take Mary as your wife. Then Mary set off travelling with Joseph right beside. They walked and talked for miles and miles until Bethlehem arrived. With a baby inside Mary who was going to be king. When they finally arrived, there was no room at the inn. So a place was found by haystack and corn, and in this spot the baby was born. So they stayed in the shed where animals fed, and the baby had straw instead of a memory foam bed. Then there were shepherds maybe cleaning their shoes, trying to scrape off the smelly sheep poos. Till all of a sudden was something weird. From absolutely nowhere this angel appeared. Don't be afraid! That's what I say. Say hi to the baby in a manger full of hay. The sheep looked at the shepherds looked at the sheep. Don't be noisy, tiptoes please. Baby Jesus is fast asleep. Shh. Next, wise men travelled ever so far, but they didn't use Google Maps, they followed a star. So the wise blokes found Jesus next to animals with fur, and they brought him some gold, frankincense and myrrh. And then baby became boy, and boy grew to man. He made stuff out of wood, he was a carpenter man. And he did lots of cool stuff. He healed the sick, told great stories and was amazing all the time. He even walked on water and even turned water into wine. Remember when people wouldn't make amends and when God and humans could no longer be friends? Well, it didn't end there, because Jesus the baby and Jesus the man was the exact same Jesus in God's rescue plan. He lived and he died on a cross made of wood. He died for you and me to turn our wrong into good. But something happened after Jesus died that was worth a big high five. Because 3 days later, he came back again. Jesus really was alive. Jesus did, and Jesus loved, to show us how his Father loves. When Jesus was all grown up, he really did a lot of stuff. On top of high hills and in boats out at sea, sat down by tables for supper or tea. But he also loved lots on a kind of tree. It's 100% true and a super cool story. Jesus said and Jesus loved, to show us how his Father loves. On a great big hill, Jesus told a story about two builders. Let's call them Billy and Bernie. Billy, being silly, built his house on the sand. but Bernie the Brains built on rock on the land. After the storm, Billy was grumpy, 'cause his house was in pieces, all broken and lumpy. But when you listen and do what I say, you're like Bernie the builder who built the right way. Jesus did and Jesus loved, to show us how his Father loves. Jesus was by a lake with friends, and people came to follow. It got late and bellies grumbled, 'cause they had no food to swallow. So Jesus did a miracle. 5,000 mouths were fed. He did it with 2 smelly fish and just 5 loaves of bread. In a boat, out at sea, his mates had a big surprise. They saw Jesus walking there. They couldn't believe their eyes. He wasn't in a boat, and he wasn't wearing skis. He was walking on the water and doing it with ease. Jesus served and Jesus loved, to show us how his Father loves. Jesus was at a table with friends like John and Pete. He made some soapy water and scrubbed their grubby feet. "You can't wash my feet," says Pete. "No way, not happening, never." But Jesus did the messy jobs, though he's the most important ever. Jesus ate and Jesus loved, to show us how his Father loves. Jesus was having supper. He broke the bread in 2. It's a picture of my body, and it's broken now for you. He also filled a cup with wine. Remember when I'm gone, that I bled because I loved you and paid for all your wrong. Jesus prayed and Jesus loved, to show us how his Father loves. Jesus was in the garden. He knew his time had come. I wish there was another way, but let my Father's will be done. Jesus died and Jesus loved, to show us how his Father loves. Some didn't like Jesus. He said he was God's son. They thought he was telling fibs and telling them for fun. And though he was God's son, they nailed him to a tree. In between 2 robbers, he died for you and me. He said it is finished, and then he closed his eyes. And in case he was pretending, they even stabbed his side. Jesus rose and Jesus loved, to show us how his Father loves. A woman was at a graveyard. A man asked her what was wrong. The lady sobbed and sniffled, "Jesus' body's gone." She thought he was a gardener, but there was no spade in view. But Jesus called her Mary. "Then teacher," she cries, "it's you." So now Jesus is alive. There's lots he wants to give. But most of all, it's life and love, so we can really live.